Every Monday to Friday, this is Peter Lewis's Money Talk. Money Talk.
Good morning, this is Peter Lewis, welcoming you to my podcast Money Talk for Monday the 10th of July. In today's business and finance headlines, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said competition between the world's biggest economies is not a winner-take-all situation and called for both sides to manage their rivalry with a fair set of rules. Chinese financial regulators have fined Ant Group 7.1 billion renminbi, that's $983 million US for financial violations, but concluding a government-led restructuring for the fintech group almost 3 years after its $37 billion IPO was called off. Jobs growth in the US slowed more than expected in June and was revised lower for the previous 2 months in a sign the Federal Reserve's aggressive interest rate rises are beginning to cool the labour market.
Peter Lewis's Money Talk.
I'm joined now by Shanghai-based independent economist Andy Sher. Morning, Andy.
Good morning, Peter.
Let me ask you first of all about Janet Yellen's 4-day visit to Beijing, designed to try and open at least some lines of communication between economic and financial officials and to stabilise the relationship between the US and China. Do you think it was a success?
Didn't make much progress. Just the perception of talking, trying to reassure the market. I think that maybe there's a bit of positive effect from there, but there's no substance.
I mean, she talked a lot about supply chain. She was trying to make the argument that diversifying supply chains is not the same as decoupling, that the two countries, remain economically bound at the hip. Do you think that hit home? Do you think it's a sensible argument that it does make sense for countries to diversify their supply chains, but it doesn't mean that they're de-risking or decoupling?
Well, I think that any country can do whatever it wants to do, and the U.S. can do whatever it wants to do. It's been talking about this for 5 years. Mm-hmm. So if it's not doing it, it means that it can't. So I don't think that it will pursue the Chinese government about anything. I think that the reality is that the U.S. is imposing more and more tech restrictions, and with the clearly stated goals of slowing China down.
You think that is the case? Because they deny that, don't they? They say these sanctions, these restrictions on the tech sector are very narrowly...
It's obvious now. You look at the restriction on chips, it's clearly to... initially it was to target a mobile phone, Huawei's mobile phone business. Mm-hmm. I think that... the military does not need small chips, okay? Mm, mm. And then there's now they're talking about more restrictions on AI chips, basically the chips made by NVIDIA, because they want to slow down AI development.
And we've got more.
That's clearly stated.
Yeah, and we've got more coming, haven't we? We're going to have an investment ban. Yeah. We're going to have maybe a ban on Chinese companies accessing cloud computing. So it does sound like that this is having quite a big economic effect already on China.
No, it's not an economic effect. It's really on tech development because that AI research does use a lot of cloud services. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you make of China's response that they announced last week to this, which was to restrict the exports of certain minerals that are needed in semiconductors like gallium and germanium? Do you think that's significant?
Well, it's just a kind of a symbolic gesture to show that China is willing to fight back. Mm. That I think the U.S. thinks that because the U.S. buys from China, so a lot more from China, so China doesn't have much bargaining power. So China is trying to demonstrate that it can do something. So I assume that more will be done soon. Mm.
So it sounds like from what you're saying, I mean, foreign investors have been pulling out of the Chinese equity market and waiting. One of the things they're hoping for is to see signs of an improvement in the geopolitical relations between the two countries. But it sounds like from what you're saying, you don't think this is enough. It doesn't go far enough to really change the overall direction things are moving in.
Well, I think it's not possible for significant improvement because there are fundamental differences China is developing its military because it believes that it needs a blue water navy to protect its trade. And now the ocean-bound trade is multiple times of the U.S.'s. And an Anglo-Saxon navy dominates the oceans like it has been for 400 years. And China cannot live at the mercy of Anglo-Saxons. So that obviously China wants to develop a global navy capable of protecting its trade.
So this means that
I think that then when the Anglo-Saxons want to accept that, and Beijing is still kind of struggling on why Anglo-Saxons are so vehemently opposed. I think that the Beijing does not understand that Anglo-Saxons' prosperity and security originated with the naval dominance, and they still feel that way. So that is an existential challenge to Anglo-Saxons from their perspective. So I think Beijing still does not understand that yet. So I think that this means that fundamentally we are headed for some kind of a confrontation.
You think so? So this could be something like the South China Sea, maybe, where
much greater. I think that, and you look at how the West screamed about China's military development. It started with Australia. It was way before the pandemic, and I think Australia, obviously, as an Anglo-Saxon country far away, felt the most vulnerable about an alternative naval power. So just like when Japan rose 100 years ago.
But this is
after Japan was the Russian Far East Fleet, and the U.S. started developing this plan, so-called Operation Orange, to defeat Japan. It took 40 years to work out. There's no doubt something like this is happening now.
This is very different, isn't it, to really the West's last, or certainly the US's last set of trade disputes, which was with Japan in the 1980s. At that time, although Japan was a rising power economically and starting to dominate trade, it never wanted to develop a big navy or a military.
I think that the issue, people get confused. No, Japan was never. Japan was an occupied country and still is. So I think the economic dispute was significant, but not like what's going on with China today. And China is 10 times the Japan size. It's entirely different. And I think that the Anglo-Saxons want the world to stay this way and to be managed by them. And security guaranteed by them. So China needs to operate within that framework. So I don't see, I think that Chinese didn't appreciate how strongly Anglo-Saxons would react. They thought that China thought that China got bigger. It must have more say in its neighborhood, and it should have a Taiwan back. And obviously, without U.S. backing, Taiwan would negotiate with Beijing for sure. Okay, and that issue will be settled peacefully. So that is the kind of they say we are asking for this. But I think that the Beijing didn't understand that East Asia is the center of the global economy, and Anglo-Saxon dominance actually is all about East Asia. Controlling this part of the world means controlling the whole world. So to them, this becomes a global struggle for global domination.
So it sounds like then that the key issues between the two countries remain unresolved and are not going to get resolved based on what you say. Let me ask you about the Ant Group fine. The Chinese regulators have fined Ant Group nearly $1 billion, but said now that their 3-year sort of crackdown, if you like, is coming to an end, and that Ant is going to shift to more normalised supervision, is what the regulators said. Is the tech crackdown now over?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think that the country is trying to make private businesses feel more comfortable because they've been feeling very insecure for a bunch of years. The crackdown on tech companies was kind of a symbolic on government's attitude towards private businesses. So there is a softening in tone. But in terms of substance, I'm not sure. I think tech companies with the scale and the reach are considered threats to the political system. So they need to be tamed. That means that they need to become small. So I think Alibaba has this plan of splitting. I don't know when it's going to happen. But for these companies, the business model is based on reach. You make a little bit of money from everybody, and you have this reach. You can take. That's why you become very profitable. So it's reach is essential. Like Google, like Amazon or Apple. It's these companies need to be profit motive drives them to become very, very big, to become monopolies essentially. And then they become threats to the political system. Just like in the United States. The United States now, they have a disproportionate influence over public opinions. And they actually regulate public opinions. And in the Chinese context, that means that you're competing against the Communist Party. That is just no. I think the party has not figured out how to resolve this problem, that you want these tech companies to be strong, to be innovative, but also they don't pose any threat to you.
But these companies have become smaller now, haven't they? Because, as you say, Alibaba is splitting up into 6, and if you look at the share buyback that Ant is doing, it's valued now 70% less than what it was 3 years ago at the time of the IPO. So that they have become smaller, haven't they? But can they still thrive now in this new environment?
No, in terms of valuation has come down, but in terms of the business reach, I'm not sure yet. You look at everybody uses Ali's this payment system and also the online shopping system, the platform. So it has this enormous access to data, and social data in the private hands are basically not acceptable to the political system.
Let me ask you quickly before you go about the economy. We're at the end of the first half now. We're going to get GDP data for the first half of the year in about 10 days' time. Also, investors still waiting for some stimulus from the government. The Politburo now is meeting later this month, so investors hoping that they might see something from that. Are you hopeful that we might see some sort of action from the Chinese government to back up the words on the economy?
No, I don't think so. I think that but the government will talk about a stimulus to give people hope, and sometimes to make a gesture like cutting interest rate by 10 basis points. And the reality is that Chinese economy has accumulated lots of excesses over the past 10 years, mainly for political reasons. Before the last party congress, I think the government had a reason to stimulate, to keep it going until the political transition completed. It took 10 years to complete the political transition. And from the previous era, completed to a new era, now that transition has occurred. So the political incentive for keeping it going, regardless of the cost, is gone. And then we have the problems that have accumulated are so big, like the property sector, to peak at 10 billion square meters under construction. Now, in the last 2 years, they shrunk by about 10%. So it's got a long way to go. So there's no way that the government wants to stimulate a proper property sector and make it bigger again. Then you create a bigger problem for yourself down the road. So I don't see why they would be doing that. Now, if they let the property market adjust, that means the economy will struggle for a number of years to come. So that's a reality.
Okay, well, it's interesting to hear your thoughts as always, Andy. Thank you very much indeed for that. That's Andy Scher, who is a Shanghai-based independent economist. And thank you very much for listening this morning.